Faith promises. When we make commitments before God and mankind, we should do so with total honesty. Here's Gene.
And the word there that is very important is honesty. Now, as we read this in terms of vows, remember that this uniquely is designed for Israel. But Jesus will help us to understand this for our lives today. Numbers chapter 30, verses 1 and 2. Moses told the leaders of the Israelite tribes, "This is what the Lord has commanded. When a man makes a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to put himself under an obligation, he must not break his word." And there you can underscore in your mind that very important statement, he must not break his word. It relates to honesty. He must do whatever he has promised. Now, what does this really mean? Well, Jesus helps us to understand. In Matthew 5, 33 through 37, "Again you have heard that it was said to our ancestors," referring back to this Old Testament passage, "You must not break your oath, but you must keep your oaths to the Lord. But I tell you, don't take an oath at all, either by heaven, because it is God's throne, or by the earth, because it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, because it is the city of the great king. Neither should you swear by your head, because you cannot make a single hair white or black, but let your word yes be yes, and your no be no. Anything more than this is from the evil one." And so, what is he saying here? Well, not all vows are wrong, because if that were true, Jesus himself took an oath before the high priest. He's not saying a vow or an oath is wrong. If an oath were wrong or a vow, then we were wrong when we stood before the pastor and repeated our marriage vows. Vows are not wrong. A court of law. It is not wrong to take an oath that will tell the truth based on the Scriptures. Then what is this teaching? What is the meaning here? Well, let me give you a statement. In essence, Jesus was addressing the manipulation and the deceitfulness that accompanied taking an oath in the Jewish culture. Some were swearing in relationship to almost everything. And this is a matter of record. And at the same time, they were having mental reservations. And they had rationalized, if I have mental reservation, then my vow, I don't have to keep it. Or actual intentions never to keep their promises. That was part of the whole particular leadership culture within Israel at Jesus' time. That's why he called them whitewashed sepulchres, dead men's bones. They had no intentions of keeping their vows. So what Jesus was talking about is honesty, truthfulness, not being dishonest. And that's why the principle reads here, when we make commitments before God and mankind, we should do so with total honesty. That's the issue that Jesus is dealing with and giving us this clarification in the New Testament. Which leads to a reflection-response question. What are some other situations that may make it impossible to keep commitments, and how can we handle these circumstances without violating the will of God? And here it relates to what I like to call a faith commitment. You can call it a vow. It's a faith commitment. And here's an illustration. Paul encouraged the Corinthians to make financial commitments based on what they believed would be future income. You can read about that in 2 Corinthians 9:5. In essence, Paul was saying, commit to giving so much based on the fact that you have a job and you will have future income, and you can count on what that might be. We might call this faith promise giving. And most of us have engaged in that kind of giving. I know my wife and I have. Looking forward, here is the potential, and here's what we want to trust God to be able to give. Now, however, if it becomes impossible to follow through on this faith promise, it would not be considered dishonesty and lack of integrity before God and mankind. And there are some who would say once you make that kind of commitment, if you back away from that commitment, then you are violating God's will and you're in for serious difficulty. Now, the fact is that if we're backing away from a commitment for selfish reasons, that's one thing. But if we cannot make a faith commitment based on the fact of reversal and economy, that is not a violation of the will of God. And so there are illustrations in Scripture of faith promises. Call them vows if you wish, but they must be dealt with in terms of honesty. That's what he's dealing with here. And that's what Jesus is talking about. Now, we could go into other issues where we're to owe no man anything. And we could go into situations where we get ourselves into difficulty. And we are violating our loan agreements. And by the way, I don't think we owe any man anything until we violate our loan agreements. And there are reversals. And those are issues that have to be dealt with very, very carefully by always thinking in terms of low risk, thinking in terms of wisdom, thinking in terms of backup plans, in terms of something goes wrong, making sure that we communicate when we get into reversal situations, and avoiding bankruptcy at all costs if possible in our particular culture. Although I think there are situations where it is legitimate. But it should not be a backup plan based upon high risk and foolish decisions. And so God gives us principles to guide us through these difficult situations in our lives.